Carol is a thoughtful, contributing leader, but what I love is her attention to detail and basically be able to give positive feedback and help to integrate the decisions and move them toward action.
She certainly sets an example for the rest of us with her amazing energy level and the quality of the human being that she is. And therefore, when she speaks, we all listen.
Carol M. Poteet Buchanan was born in Washington, D.C. on March 29, 1929, to Hattie Carol Welch Martin and George W. Martin, Jr.
My father believed strongly in the stock market and talked to us about stocks from the day we were born. He was a graduate of the high school, Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C., and then he went to Howard University.
She was the oldest of 5 children, George III and Consuela, and her half-brother and sister, Alfred and Loretta. When Carol was a young girl, shortly after the birth of Consuela, her parents separated.
My grandfather was, quote-unquote, the undisputed head of the household. And it was very difficult for my mother, so that at a fairly early age, she decided that my father's family was very comfortable financially and could take care of us. She was not very comfortable financially, but she was going to leave. So she said to them, "You will take care of the children, and I am leaving." And that's what she did. Went to New York. She had some uncles in New York. My mother was very clever and very optimistic about life and could always find a job.
Her grandfather died when she was 1 year old. He was a successful businessman owning and operating silent movie theaters in the early 1920s, along with other enterprises, including a dry cleaning business.
He bought a home on 24th and M Northwest during the Depression for all of $4,000, but he was able to buy a house. And his brother bought the house next door and set up his business as a physician. So they were there, and it was very lovely.
When her mother left for New York, she took the baby, Consuela, known as Connie, with her. Carol and George were raised by her father and her grandmother. As a young girl, Carol's father owned a restaurant on U Street in Washington, D.C. Next door were movie theaters that provided weekend adventures.
In those days, they had double features, and they would have matrons in the theater, so that during the day when children came in unaccompanied, the matrons made sure you were good. And we would, my cousin and I would go to the theater in the morning, see a double feature, go to my father's restaurant for lunch, and come back to the movies, and maybe even see another double feature. And they would have ads and everything going on. And then, of course, by sundown, the children had to be out of the movies. They were not allowed in without an adult, so.
As she was about to enter junior high school, her grandmother died. She and her brother moved in with her great-aunt Annie. Her Uncle Yulee lived next door. He and his son Charles were both doctors.
My cousin Charles took care of me. My Uncle Yulee, who lived next door, took care of me. If I needed to go to a dermatologist and there was no dermatologist in the family, my cousin Charles would send a vial of penicillin with me to the dermatologist to pay for it. And I didn't know that that's what it was. But it was all there was a very strong community. And in the summers we would spend down in Colton, Maryland on the beach with my great Aunt Beatty and her husband. So it was literally a communal upbringing of children.
Her family placed a high importance on education. However, she was not an inspired student.
We were expected to do well in school, so we couldn't come home with bad marks. I really didn't excel in school until I got to college.
As she was entering high school, the world came to a sudden change when on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. The U.S. immediately entered World War II. Her father, felt a sense of duty to enlist.
The day after Pearl Harbor, he joined the Army, and we were, much to our chagrin, but he was a man with children going into the service, but he was going to fight for his country, so he was there.
The military was a difficult experience for her father, as he was appalled by the racial bias and discrimination he observed and experienced.
And fought it the whole time he was in the service. And every time he sent a package home, we were afraid they were sending his belongings home because he'd been put in jail for doing something.
Carol attended Paul Laurence Dunbar Academic High School for college preparatory. She participated in many activities. She was on the debate team, wrote for the newspaper under the pseudonym Two Lips, and was a member of the cheerleading squad.
Cheerleading is not like today. Our cheerleading was rah, rah, rah. It wasn't standing on somebody's head and doing somersaults. My high school practically never won a game, but we cheered. We enjoyed cheering.
As was the case throughout the United States during this era, Dunbar High School was a segregated school. While the iniquities were felt by many throughout the country, there were some positive attributes for Carol at her school.
The schools in Washington, D.C. for what were then called colored or Negro children were far superior to what they were in most of the country. Our teachers were among the brightest African Americans you could possibly, especially women, because there were no other jobs. So teaching was the best job you could get. So in fact, in my high school, there were more Columbia graduates, Columbia University masters and PhDs than one would expect to see in any public school today, because they would all keep getting further educated, but they weren't able to go anywhere with it other than teaching. I had been told that in order to get into a good college, you had to have 2 years of a foreign language, at least 1 or 2 years of an ancient language. All of those things we got in high school.
Carol graduated from high school in 1946. She initially hoped to enter college to prepare for law school.
But my family was not happy about that because African American attorneys in those days did not have a good time in the courts, and they did not want me there.
Carol chose to study education and entered Minard Teachers College in Washington, D.C., where she excelled in her studies. She joined a sorority and became a focused student.
The sorority made it difficult because they had so many activities that it was pulling away from you time you needed for academic work. In order to keep up, because my family would have made me drop the sorority if I had not kept up academically, so I worked that much harder.
She graduated from Minard Teachers College magna cum laude in 1950 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in English.
I was third in my class, and I remembered we were so proud because in the paper, the African American paper, it said, "Beauty and brains graduate from Minard Teachers College."
With Carol now a college graduate, her aunt decided she should be married. Her aunt had a friend of the family in mind and set up a meeting for Carol.
So I think I was supposed to meet him maybe on a Tuesday or Wednesday. Well, Monday, I got on the train and went to New York. I was not having it because I had had the luxury of having an element. My favorite two teachers in life were my kindergarten teacher, who had never married, and my 7th grade Latin teacher, who had never married. And they were beautiful, smart women, and I wanted to be like them.
Carol reconnected with her mother in New York. However, she did not teach when she first moved to the city.
I was a little nervous about the schools in New York. I was told that new teachers were sent to the worst schools in town, and I was just not comfortable with that. So I got a lot of I call them odd jobs. They were real jobs. I worked at Pace College in the registrar's office for a while. And then I got a job in a photographic processing lab, Bernie Hoffman's lab, and had a lot of fun. I met a lot of people like Cecil Beaton and Truman Capote and, Ed Nano, really very famous people. And I was having fun, except there were long hours and sometimes weekends.
In the early 1950s, she was corresponding with an old childhood friend named Bill Poteet. They had been friends from grade school through high school, and he was now stationed in Germany in the Air Force.
He used to pull my pigtails, and we would fight. And then as we got a little older, we would play. We'd have races and, who could win the fastest race, because I was like a tomboy.
A young man in New York had asked Carol to marry him, and she reached out to Bill for his advice.
Oh, he said, I don't know. He said, doesn't really sound like you're that much in love. Why don't we talk about it? I'm coming home in a few months. Why don't we talk about it?
Bill returned home a few months later, and they met to talk.
All of a sudden, there was a spark. 6 months later, we were married.
They were married in New York City by the Justice of the Peace on November 12, 1953. Bill went to work as a bank teller. On February 2, 1954, their daughter, Linda, was born.
I knew that I wanted to continue working. And I met a very smart doctor who said to me, if you're going to go back to work after your daughter's born, go before she is a year old, preferably no later than 6 months.
Carol and Bill shared responsibilities of caring for Linda, along with help from other trusted people.
Some of the time my mother was with me, and then sometimes I had a very good housekeepers. So I was lucky, and I felt very comfortable being away during the day.
By 1960, Bill felt it was time for Carol to put her education and talents to work in her chosen field of education.
My husband said to me, look, you studied to be a teacher, go and become a teacher. And that's what I did. And finally, and I fell in love with teaching. I really loved it.
In 1961, she began her teaching career as an English teacher in junior high school 59Q. She also entered Hunter College in New York City and graduated with a Master of Arts degree in English in 1963. That same year, on November 22, 1963, Carol's students and the nation would be shocked by the sudden news that President John F. Kennedy had been assassinated in Dallas, Texas.
The classes were so large that we were so overcrowded in the school that I was teaching a double class in the cafeteria, teaching an English class in the cafeteria. And all of a sudden I saw two little girls racing through the cafeteria, crying, tears running down. And I stopped them. I didn't know what was going on. And they couldn't get out what they wanted to tell me. And then I heard this buzz sound over the loudspeaker. And my kids and I stopped to listen. And the principal was telling us that John F. Kennedy had been killed. And it was, nobody knew what to do. Because it was in our lifetime, that was the first assassination. And of course, school was dismissed, kids were allowed to go home. I didn't know what to do with myself. I took my daughter to my best girlfriend's house and said, would you hold Linda for a bit? And all I knew, I went into a church across the street and sat. I didn't know what to do. It was that traumatic for me.
Through the rest of the decade, turmoil would grow. With the escalation of the Vietnam War, news of student unrest was a daily feature in papers and on television. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum. Influential leaders such as Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were making an impact throughout the country.
I was the advisor for the African American Club. And then some students came to me and said, we want to start a black club. And I said, but we have a black club. We have an African American. No, they're not black enough. We want a black club. So I became the advisor for the black club. And then a group of Italian students came to me and said, we want to start an Italian club. Well, but they wanted the Godfather, the real Godfather, as their emblem, and nobody was going to touch that. So I became the advisor for the Italian American. I mean, it was that kind of thing. I would get to school, if I got to school before 8 o'clock in the morning, my principal would say to me, what's going to happen today? Because he would know that there was going to be some kind of demonstration or something, because the kids would tell me before they would tell anybody else. And I became very, very involved with the students. When we would have sit-ins at the school and the police would come, the kids would ask me to come into the cafeteria and stay with them because they were afraid of the police. But they knew that if I was there, the police would not do anything.
Hope was dashed with despair when Malcolm X was assassinated on February 2, 1965. 3 years later, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was gunned down in Memphis on April 4, 1968. Then on June 6th of that year, Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated in a Los Angeles hotel. Carol, then teaching English at Springfield Gardens High School, experienced the emotions of these events with her students.
Kids were just generally angry and confused and frightened. And I was happy to be working with teenagers that time because I felt that I could help.
In her career, she continued to advance. In 1969, she became coordinator of student affairs of Springfield Gardens High, and in 1974 was appointed principal of Middle College High School.
And I was there for 2 years. And then my old principal, my high school principal, became executive director of the high schools of the city of New York and asked me to come down to the central board as his assistant.
Carol took the position of executive assistant to the executive director, Division of High Schools, in 1976. In 1978, she was promoted to director of Pupil Personnel Services, Division of High Schools, where she stayed for 8 years. She continued to be promoted through administrative positions. In 1986, Special Assistant to the Chancellor. In 1987, Special Assistant to the Deputy Chancellor for Instruction and Development. And in 1989, Special Assistant for Collaborative Programs to the Vice Chancellor for Urban Affairs, City University of New York.
The reason I left the school to go to the board in the first place was Sam Palatnik, who was that high school principal originally, said to me, but if you come to the central board, you can have influence over so many more kids because you're influencing the teachers who are influencing the kids. It wasn't really true, but that was the idea.
In her personal life, she and Bill were enjoying their lives and raising Linda. Challenged to see the places of the world that she was teaching her students, the family began traveling to Europe for summer vacations. First, a trip to England to see the haunts of the bard Shakespeare.
Once we got the bite, there was no stopping us. So I would work summer school every year, and as soon as I got my summer school check, that was for our vacation. And then we started going to the Caribbean every April to get away from the cold, and to Europe every summer.
She was a teacher in New York, where I grew up. And at the same time that she was a teacher, I was attending the junior high school that she taught. So as a result, everybody knew her, and everybody always wanted to tell her when they saw me or when they didn't see me. And so there were times where during my childhood, I didn't have the fortune of being able to kind of sneak here or go here and do this and do that because everybody was very quickly trying to go back and tell Miss Poteet that they saw her daughter here and there. She's been very fair throughout, very opinionated, but will still listen to your opinions and give you most of the time an opportunity to express them. So it's been fun. It's been fun.
In the late 60s, Bill decided he wanted to change his career from banking to teaching. He took the appropriate courses and in 1971 passed the physical to enter the school system, when, that October, he died suddenly of a massive coronary.
I guess in those days we didn't know about cholesterol and all the things we know about today, and he was 41 years old.
The following month, Carol was diagnosed with kidney cancer.
I guess I had the best doctor in the world that I could have. He took out the kidney, never had chemo, never had radiation, never had a pill. He took it out, he said everything was encapsulated in the kidney.
While she was in the hospital recuperating, a man she had worked with while at the junior high school stopped by to see her. He had been the music director at the school. Carol barely recognized him. His name was Samuel Carol Buchanan. Ironically, he was also known as Carol. 2 years later, while she was sitting in her office at school, she looked out her window and saw him walking down the hallway.
It was about 5 o'clock in the evening, and this same man walked by. And I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Well, I had a dream about you and thought I'd better come and see how you're doing." And asked me out on a date. That was that. That was my second husband. We were together for 38 years.
He was a multi-talented man. While Carol continued her rise through the New York City school system, he developed his own interests. In the 1960s, he had joined the Peace Corps and volunteered in Ghana, Kenya, and Nigeria. When he returned to New York, he continued to study music, acquiring his PhD. He worked as a singer and actor and was producer of broadcasting for the New York City Board of Education and directed a choir in New York City. In 1990, the couple decided it was time to retire. After searching the world, they decided on Sarasota.
It had the three elements we were looking for. It had good climate, cultural center, and good health care. And those were the three things we were looking for.
For the next decade, they were snowbirds. In 1995, after over 20 years together, the couple married on Captiva Island.
The priest said that we were slow learners.
In 1999, Carol retired from the choir he directed for over 40 years, and they moved to Sarasota full-time. He had no intentions to lead another choir ever again.
A year later, we had the 2000 election, and my husband's, the NAACP at that time had run out of money, the local one. And my husband said, "Well, what could we do to help them?" And he said, "Well, I'll do a concert." So we put together a choir. We called friends and asked people to find people. And we did a concert down at First United Methodist Church. Had almost 1,100 people there. Made enough money for the NAACP to run for a whole year, to pay their rent. And swore he'd never do it after that, but the choir members kept calling and saying, "When do we meet again?" So this is our 15th year of the choir.
We gave benefit concerts to support nonprofits. And in addition to that, we used to sing during the Christmas season in nursing homes in the community.
Through their political activities, they met notaries such as Bill Clinton and Michelle Obama. They continued to travel the world together. In December of 2010, a week after returning from a trip to Egypt, her husband, Carol, suffered a heart attack and died a week later. The next year, she was diagnosed with liver cancer.
So I tell the story that I will never marry again because what would I get?
While Carol is continuing to fight the liver cancer, she has also continued in her efforts for our community, serving on numerous boards of nonprofit organizations in the arts and community service. She was a founding member of the Embracing Our Difference program in 2004 and continues to serve as the business manager for the Gulf Coast Community Choir.
She supported him as the director of the choir, with him handling the music and she handling the administrative side of things. I used to admire the way they supported one another, and she brought to the choir the same love and competence and thoroughness that she brought to all of the things that she became involved in our community.
Well, of course, her activity with Embracing Our Differences may be one of the most significant contributions that she's made to the community. The fact is that it's had a great influence on young people in both Sarasota and Manatee counties, where they've been able to not only view the poster boards, but have programs to go back and discuss just what it is that brings about prejudice, and how they can look at the world through new eyes and be able to themselves, the young people themselves, can be productive citizens.
She's gotten involved in varied community areas. Education is a prime key with her, and she's involved in a lot of educational activities. She's involved in the arts, certainly with West Coast Black Theater, with Florida Studio Theater. She's also involved in knowing that things are done correctly, that the truth comes out, and she's very strong, but she's not aggressive. She can go in and do things in a very quiet manner that people don't realize she's behind the scenes, but she is.
With Carol is this deep commitment to whatever she's doing. For example, we have our Embracing Our Differences luncheon, the first one we ever had. And Carol is right there quietly. All of a sudden she puts 8 tables of people together, and she just really does connect the community to whatever that she's doing. And she's just such a beautiful, beautiful human being, and I just admire her so much.
What Carol brings is, and this would apply both with respect to Embracing Our Differences in Florida Studio Theater, the roles that she plays at both. As a human being, you just get this sense of a deep, deep convictions for what she believes in that's backed up by a very quiet passion. Carol has such respect for other people and an ability to communicate in a way that people want to open their arms to her. And yet, it's not pablum. There's real substance to what Carol has to say, and I would say that what her main accomplishment in that context is that she impacts the direction of the organization in such a positive way.
We asked Carol Buchanan her advice for those who follow.
I always feel better when I'm giving than when I'm receiving. I always feel better. There is something about having someone else feel good about what you've done for them that really warms your heart, and it's very fulfilling. I think laughter is very important. I believe also that if you always ask the question, how can I do it, rather than why can't I do it, or answering, if you think of the reasons you can do rather than the reasons you can't do, I think that always helps you. I think we are too busy in some cases buying into the hype and being afraid of everything that's different from the way we think, everything that's different from the way we look. We need to get beyond that, because it's a very small world now, and we need to be in it together, not only for ourselves but to save the world.